we'll start with a question or two that has come in advance, and then I'll open it up to any questions that anyone has. So the first one is, can you talk to us about silence and why you go into silence? So I've been in silence for the last 2 weeks almost, since the 5th of May, until Ganga Dashera, which is the 24th, Ganga's birthday. And I open it just for our satsang together. Or occasionally on the banks of Ganga in the Arti, if there's something that needs to be shared there. So, why do we go into silence? Well, this is something it's a very, very ancient and fundamental practice of the Indian spiritual tradition. I've done them before. It's the first time I've done this in the last many years, and I've been wanting to do it again and wanting to do it. And I kept thinking, well, there will come a right time. There will come a right time. And I finally had to realize that if I didn't make a right time, it wasn't going to happen. That waiting for life to create the space for me to be in silence was no longer part of my existence. And I needed to very actively create it. That it wasn't just enough to sort of say to the universe, I'd like there to be space created for this, because things just kept coming, and until and unless I made a very, very conscious decision that I needed to do this, it wasn't going to happen. So I'm in silence, and why we do it, there's so many reasons. I'll give you a couple of the reasons of theory, and then a little bit of actually what the experience for me has been. The theory of silence is, I assume, mostly obvious, which is that when the goal is to go within, it's very difficult to do that when we're too focused outward. It's the same reason that we mostly close our eyes when we meditate. I mean, you could say, well, why wouldn't you watch TV while you meditate? Well, I mean, in theory, life should be meditation. So in theory, you should be able to meditate while you watch TV. I mean, there's nothing about TV itself that should be antithetical to meditation. The problem is that if I'm focused outward, it's very difficult to simultaneously be focused inward. And if I'm going to focus inward, I need to quiet as much of the outer world as possible, which again is why we close our eyes. It's why we don't usually choose the place of meditation as, a crowded coffee shop. Could you, whoever's phone that is, if you wouldn't mind just turning it off, that would be fantastic. Thank you. You could meditate theoretically in a crowded Starbucks. Why not? You could meditate in the middle of the road. Why not? The cows do it. I mean, really, people say, why is the cow holy? And there's so many reasons the cow is holy, but for me, my worship of the cow is just that. Brilliant creature. She's not dumb or dull at all. She knows exactly what's going on. And yet, there she is in the middle of chaotic traffic. She's not fast asleep. If you watch for a while, you see her eyes open. So it's not that she's actually, in a deep sleep, but she's just so relaxed, in such a deep state of relaxation. So cows can do it, difficult for us. You don't choose places that are crowded, that are busy. We close our eyes, we close our ears as much as we can. We choose a quiet place so that we can go within. Now, with silence, it takes it to a different level, because obviously we're silent when we meditate. Obviously I'm not chatting on the phone while you meditate. I mean, you could watch TV, still you're silent. You'd be sitting at Starbucks, still you're silent. But the silence is crucial, which is why we don't meditate while we talk on the telephone, for example. I have to quiet both that which comes in as well as my interaction with it. So yes, while I meditate, we're all in silence. But the silence the rest of the time. So everyone is silent when they meditate, but why be silent otherwise? Because it takes you in much more. Much, much more. And I'm going to circle back to that because I had a very interesting personal realization this time. There was a new realization in silence this time, which I'll come back and share with you in a moment. But so it takes you in. B, it allows you to do, as Puja Swamiji explains, to grab the space between a thought and an action or a reaction. Normally, something happens, we react instantaneously. Somebody hits me, I hit them back. They insult me, I insult them back. It's just we're like stimulus response in our lives. And what we very rarely realize is there actually is a space between having a thought of how dare you, or having a thought of oh my God, that was so rude, and actually reacting to it. I do have a space. I do have an option. But we forget that because it's so instantaneous. It's so quick. I'm hungry, I eat. I want to drink, I drink. I'm greedy, I grab. I'm lustful, I grab in a different way. Whatever the thought that comes to me, whatever the instinct, whatever the stimulus, I react. And in silence, when you can't react, it teaches you how to grab that space. And that stays with you, of course, the rest of the time, because suddenly you're in touch with an awareness that this space even exists. Another thing that silence does is it allows you to hear an inner voice, because silence isn't just I don't speak. I've also been really, really careful about the noise around me. So I've been putting in earplugs when I'm in the office because the reception can get kind of loud. And I've noticed as I go into silence, the sounds around me are even more pronounced. There's such a state of quiet within that even sounds that don't pertain to me, it's not people speaking to me, it's people speaking on the other side of a door or a window. But nonetheless, it impacts me in a way that it normally doesn't. So I find that I've been working with earplugs in and avoiding places and situations of lots of sound. In that quiet within, you can hear what we usually can't hear. And that's one of the other main fundamental points of it, is in order to hear that divine voice within, you have to be quiet. There's a demonstration that I do frequently. We won't do it tonight. I'll give you the punchline without doing the whole demo, of getting half the group to chant Om and the other half the group to make lots of ruckus, lots and lots of noise at the same time. And then you make the people who are making a lot of noise suddenly become quiet, and of course you can hear the chanting of Om, which had been going on the entire time. It's just when the ruckus makers were doing their thing, you couldn't hear it. And it's a beautiful demo, and that's why I do it so frequently, is to help us realize that sound of Om is there. It's there all the time, but we don't realize it because there's so much noise. And so the practice of silence quiets that ruckus in our own mind. Because you can go to the quietest place on earth, but the mind is still making the noise. The loudest spot is actually your own mind. And so what the practice of silence does is it brings quiet into our own minds so that we can hear. The other last piece of this on a personal level that I've experienced this time, in addition to all of the other parts that I knew I would experience, I had a new realization this time, which is part of my habit, I guess you could say, habit of moving through the world, habit of relating in the world, is thinking about and commenting on things in the world around me. Not so much in a critical way, we try obviously not to be judgmental, but just a comment, just a commentary on how things are going or what's happened or that was really good or that sort of commentary awareness to myself, to other people. Oh, that went really well, or whatever it may have been, that was nice. And what I've realized or even something that was funny that happened, or some experience happened during the day that, I'm in a habit of sharing. You say, oh God, yeah, this happened to me earlier today. I did this, or this happened. And in silence, of course, you can't share that. And none of it is ever important enough that it's really worth like the 20 minutes it would take you to type up the story in an email. So when you know that you can't share it, what I've realized is it stops coming to my mind. That my mind, and I've just learned this now, has a habit, whether you call it a sanskara, whether you call it a neuronal pattern, we talk about both of those a lot in here. And I've realized one of mine that I hadn't been quite so aware of is just the way that it notices and responds to the world around me. And how when I can't share that, because part of the habit is, you share it with someone else. This happened, or that was nice, or this one did this nice thing, or whatever it may be. But when you can't share it, what has happened to me over these weeks is my mind has stopped even noticing those things. Because I know, 3 weeks down the line, it's really not going to be interesting or important enough to share with someone 3 weeks later. Yeah, you remember that? Well, that was... And so, since my mind now knows, In the beginning, the first couple of days, they would still come to my mind. And then I'd realize, oh wait, I can't call someone or tell someone this. And as I've gotten in the habit of being in silence, my mind has stopped even having that habit. Because since it's certainly not going to be what I carry with me out of silence, it's certainly not going to be what I'm sharing with people weeks later. And since there's no way to share it now, and no, I'm not going to spend 20 minutes typing it into an email, the mind doesn't even notice it, and it just lets it go in the moment. And so it's become also such a beautifully freeing experience of creating even more space than I had been aware of. Creating space in places that I hadn't even realized were occupying space in my mind. So that's been another gift of the silence. And these are the sorts of things that happen as you delve into spiritual practice of any sort of restraint, any sort of sadhana. Whether it's a specific type of fasting. Typically in the West we think of fasting as you literally don't eat anything. But in India there's all sorts of types of fasting. People will fast in different ways, different days of the week, maybe just milk and fruit. Maybe they'll eat normally but just no salt, or maybe no grains. Or there's all types of different what we would call diets in the West, but here are actually considered fasts because they're not about weight loss. It's not about cutting carbs or fat or anything like that. It's about a spiritual practice. Here's how I'm used to eating. I'm going to change that. Here's my habitual way of doing food. I'm going to change that. Here's how I'm used to sleeping. Well, I'm going to change that. I'm going to get up really early every day for a while. Whatever it may be, whatever the specific sadhana may be, and typically they tend to center around food, sleep, sex, the sorts of things that are part of most people's lives, out of which people tend to get enjoyment, saying, no, okay. For this period of time or in this place, I'm going to abstain from these things, or I'm going to experience them in a different way, even married couples. And the point behind all of these things is that we learn a lot about our own habits only when you're able to take a step back. Talk to anyone who does work with addictions. What you realize is the only way to usually get people aware of the fact that they're addicted to something is when they try to stop doing it. Very few people in the beginning say, oh yeah, I have a problem with alcohol, or I have a problem with drugs, or I have a problem with cigarettes. Most people will say, oh, I enjoy it. I can stop anytime. And it's only once they say, okay, I'm stopping, or you say, okay, show me, and they can't, that then does the awareness come in, oh wait, this is actually a problem. And so as we step out of things that are habitual, even if you're going to go back to it, I'll go back to speaking, of course. When you fast, you go back to eating. But the experience that we've gleaned from that time stays with you. And that's why it's so important and so beneficial. And just the last piece of this regarding silence specifically is one of the things that I talk about a lot in here, but I've specifically been experiencing it myself the last couple of weeks, is how how much of our lives are spent in reaction rather than action. And I don't mean reaction as in somebody hits you, you hit them back. You know, by God's grace, I stopped hitting people back who hit me many, many years ago. You know, I've gotten over that one. I no longer would shout at someone who shouted at me, or I would no longer insult someone who insulted me. But nonetheless, the phone rings, you answer it. Doesn't matter what you were doing. You were in the middle of something else, phone rings, you answer it. It beeps, you look. And how reactive we've become to the world. And pulling back from speaking and having my phone forwarded to someone else, so it doesn't even ring. One of these beautiful young men in yellow answers my phone now. It forwards directly to him. It doesn't even ring. Has been phenomenal. And I told him, I said, you know, if I get any important phone calls, be sure to, you know, let me know if something important came in. It's been 2 weeks, and my phone rings like every 5 minutes, basically. And in 2 weeks, it's only been twice that he's felt the need to give me any kind of a message. And so you realize, wow, how much of our time is spent in things that we think are important but aren't. If someone else can take care of 99.9% of my phone calls, and even those 2 he could take care of, he just wanted to let me know about them. If someone else can do that, how critical is it really to be doing that every minute and every moment? Because then what we realize is the things that we want to get done don't happen. And so one of the things I've been doing these weeks is I've got a lot of projects, a lot of things that have not been able to be happening for a long time, because every day I'd say, okay, today I'm going to do it, and then the world would happen. People would show up, I had to meet with them and sit with them and talk, and calls would come in, and whatever it was. There were meetings that had to be attended, functions I had to go to. And suddenly, when you can remove that, the amount that I've actually been able to accomplish is so much more. And so that's been another really important lesson. I kind of knew what was going to happen, which was also why I was really excited to do this. But it really reminds us about the difference between urgent and an emergency. An emergency is you have to respond to it. Whatever you were doing, doesn't matter. This is an emergency. We drop everything, we respond. But urgent isn't. Until and unless it's an emergency, how can we live in a world where just because something bings and peeps and rings doesn't mean it's urgent? But that's how I know at least my life was becoming, was whatever was on the top of my inbox, whatever was the most recent message or recent phone call, whoever had gotten me most recently, was the one most sure to get my attention. I'd be in the middle of something, and then you'd get a call, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. A new email would come in, or a new call, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And realizing that the urgency created by the fact that it was recent was actually diminishing how much I was able to get done. And so that's been another more practical than spiritual benefit of it. But when our lives are spent in service, when our spiritual practice is service, it's important to be able to be efficient at that as well, and to be able to really serve. And there's only so many hours in a day, so that's been another beautiful piece of it.